Amen.
Amen.
Good morning, and I am so excited to be here with you this morning. I have never been a parishioner at St. Andrew's, but I have been a friend of this parish since Dina and I worked together at Claggett not that many years ago, but also not last year, shall we say. I've traveled with some of you to Appalachia, and I have snuck in during services in the summer sometimes, and it is just an absolute joy to be here and speaking with you today, and especially with your young people for their ceremony later on. So church folks often call this week, the second Sunday of Easter, Low Sunday. Has anyone ever heard that before? Mm-hmm. Yep, the Hannah and Dina over here raising their hands. So you'll hear this sometimes with like the slightest raise of an eyebrow and maybe the tiniest hint of a rolled eye as church leaders throughout the world think about planning this Sunday and remember last week with all of the trumpets and the lilies and the pews or chairs that are full to bursting and the offering plates that are looking the same. And honestly, we know it's hard to top that, right? Even the most faithful churchgoers will sometimes think that this is a good week to take off from church because there was a lot of excitement last week and we probably got most of what we needed for at least 2 Sundays. In other words, this is the week where real life hits us again. And re-entry is never easy after something wonderful has happened, like Jesus being resurrected from the dead. Or something more everyday like the birth of a child or a marriage or even a really nice vacation. I see this all the time in my ministry at summer camp. And who has never felt this shock when you've encountered something really special, maybe something holy, when you've been changed by that encounter, and you realize the jolt when you get back to work or school or wherever you may be going, that the rest of the world didn't stop when you were changed. Your papers are still due, and usually after Easter, but not this year, so are your taxes, and your bosses, and bullies, and annoying coworkers in the seat next to you haven't gone anywhere. We often hear that Christians are Easter people. We're people of the resurrection. And in this season, the great 50 days of Easter, we're meant to be especially jubilant. Christ is alive, and we are alive in a new way. This is a truth in which we place our hope and our identity as Christians, not just in the Easter season, but every day of the year. But living in that truth and carrying that with us into the rest of the world is really hard. It's exhausting, and it can be easy to forget why we tried. And if it's difficult to carry our joy with us into the world, you may know that it's also difficult, at least as difficult, if not more, to move through the world in the first days of grief. Maybe that's familiar to you too. Trying to function, get dinner on the table, run errands, in the first early days after losing a loved one. That's where we find the disciples in today's gospel reading. We hear that it's the first day of the week. That means it's Easter Sunday. It's 2 days after Jesus has been laid in the tomb, and the disciples are gathered together, sitting around and trying to figure out what to do next. They've seen Jesus crucified and buried, or at least they've heard that he was from good sources while they hid for their lives. Mary Magdalene came to them just that morning and shouted, "I have seen the Lord." But as far as we can tell, the disciples gathered in the locked room were not moved to any action or belief by Mary's report. Which makes me wonder where Thomas was on Easter night. We just know that he wasn't there. Was he hiding alone, afraid to be recognized in the streets? Was he paralyzed by grief? Was he just busy? Did he have a better dinner invitation somewhere else? Can we imagine for a moment what it must have felt like for Thomas to run into his friends in the marketplace later that week? "Hey Thomas, we missed you on Sunday. Yeah, just the guys hanging out. Jesus showed up magically through a locked door. So that was cool. He showed us his scars, and he also breathed on us and gave us the eternal gift of the Holy Spirit and forgiving sins. So I hope we see you next week. It would be really cool to catch up." Has anyone else ever picked the absolute worst day to skip work or school? So can you blame Thomas for being jealous? He gets a really bad rap, pretty much throughout the last 2,000 years, for his insistence on seeing Jesus with his own eyes, But his friends had their wildest dreams met, and then some, when they gathered in the locked room. They too believed only after seeing. Remember that Mary had come running only hours before. Who wouldn't feel left out or let down in Thomas's place? One of my favorite things about ministry at summer camp is seeing the variety of ways that God is made known to each camper and staff member throughout a summer. And sometimes it will happen that a young person will look up at the end of a week and say, I get it now. Before I came to camp, I didn't know God, or I didn't know God in this kind of real, special way, and something happened this week, and now I do, and I believe and I feel God's love and presence and closeness and healing power deep in my bones, and Mom, will you please take me to church more often? I've seen it happen. It's not unheard of. But I've also seen resurrection at work in 1,000 quieter ways in this ministry. I've seen it in the face of a middle schooler who's out on the river for the first time, putting their feet up on the top of the kayak and turning their eyes toward the sky. I've seen it in the determination of an elementary schooler who wants to learn enough swimming skills to pass the swim test by the end of the week, getting back in the pool over and over after every face full of water where all their friends are splashing around. I've seen it in a camper who lashed out in a heated moment and after a few really difficult and honest conversations said, I can't believe that you all would give me another chance. I sat recently in my work as a youth minister with a group of high schoolers during their pilgrimage as they were sharing where they saw God during their day. I'm so grateful for the honesty that one gave when they said, I don't really know what people mean when they say that. To this student, it felt like everyone else was accessing some sort of magical phone line to God. And they were having bursts of emotion and understanding, and they were feeling like their lives were totally changed as they traveled together, and this person just didn't relate to that experience. It wasn't unlike Thomas, wanting to meet Jesus the same way that his friends have. But maybe that's not the only way that we can access the living Christ. And in our lives, we'll meet people who do insist that there is only one way to encounter Jesus, that each of us is waiting for a particular moment in our lives, blinding flash of light, so to speak, and after that point, all of our doubts are cast out forever, and it is smooth sailing from there on out. We may have that kind of emotional experience, and then spend the rest of our lives chasing it and wondering why we can't access that feeling again. It's so tempting to give in and believe that narrative, because wouldn't it be really nice to wake up every morning and feel really confident and close to God and knowing exactly what God wants us to do today and sleep easy, going to bed knowing the same thing? It sounds really good to me. But like Thomas, and like we do in all other aspects of our lives, we have to choose what we believe. And we have to choose how we're going to show that forth in our lives. And the truth is, resurrection can be really messy, and it can be really painful. Yes, sometimes it looks like a sparkling cloth folded in an empty tomb, but a lot of the time, resurrection looks more like Jesus' scarred hands inside. We're brought to new life over and over, even in the course of our one earthly life. But our minds and our memories and our bodies may still bear the marks of our encounters with death. Has anybody read The Velveteen Rabbit by Marjorie Williams? Okay, so I won't summarize too much. There's a scene at the end where the Velveteen Rabbit, who is made of velveteen, a toy rabbit, asks his friend the skin horse what it's like to become real. It doesn't happen all at once, said the skin horse. You become. It takes a long time. Generally, by the time you're real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you're real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand. Experiencing resurrection might mean looking at our wounds and mistakes over and over, surrendering them to God day after day as the slow, sometimes painful work of transformation happens within us. This Easter season and beyond, know that Jesus is alive. As we proclaimed last week, what has grown old is being made new, and what was cast down is now being raised up. And know that each one of us is called to be part of God's redeeming work. Maybe this is a season in your life where you'll experience this with a feeling of excitement, with easy joy, a sense of closeness to God that you can't quite explain. But if this is not that kind of a season for you, or even if you've never had that kind of experience, I invite you to ask how else God might be showing you Easter in your life. Maybe there's a place that you'd like to see brought to new life, but you know it's not going to happen in a flash of light. Maybe there's a step that God is calling you to take into a place of uncertainty where you'll have to believe without seeing. Resurrection is happening all the time, all around us, in the slow, grueling process of recovery from wounds and addictions of all kinds. It's happening in the shaky and uncertain steps of reconciliation between family members and friends and groups of people throughout the world. In a few minutes, we'll recognize some young people from this parish who are entering into a transitional phase in their lives. They and their parents and this whole community will promise, using some language from Brené Brown, to show up for each other. We'll promise, to be fully present in times of grief and of triumph and all of the normal days in between. If you've ever had any kind of relationship with another human being, it might sound like this is both a really simple thing and a really important thing to do. You'll also probably know that it might be the hardest thing to stay present to someone. To look in the face of the challenges that come to us and to the people that we love, the trials and darkness that will face us down, to stay curious about each other in the midst of everything else that life will bring. Maybe that's where God is calling you to resurrection in this season. Maybe it's as simple as showing up. And that's why we're here on the Sunday after Easter. Because Jesus lives, and in this we have immeasurable hope. And we also have a charge to practice resurrection in the here and now, in this world as we know it. We're going to need each other, week after week and year after year, to be witnesses for each other of God's resurrecting love in the million different ways that each of us will encounter it throughout our lives. Today we'll reaffirm our baptismal vows together, that we will, with God's help, live as God's people in the world. Even when we can't see the whole picture, even in our darkest and in our most unremarkable days, God is at work bringing what was dead into new life, and we're here to remind each other. Amen.
Amen.